Just after midnight on August 31, 1997, one of the most recognizable women on Earth was traveling through the streets of Paris. Within minutes, a chain of events would unfold that would leave millions in disbelief and spark questions that continue nearly 3 decades later. The city was alive as usual that summer night. Tourists filled the streets, restaurants remained busy, and traffic moved along the banks of the Seine River. Inside a black Mercedes-Benz, Diana, Princess of Wales, sat alongside her companion, Dodi Fayed. In the front were driver Henri Paul and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. The group had spent the evening at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Outside, photographers waited in large numbers. Diana had lived under intense media attention for years, but on this night the pressure was especially high. As the vehicle departed, several photographers on motorcycles and in cars followed behind. Shortly after midnight, the Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Moments later, disaster struck. The vehicle crashed at high speed inside the tunnel. The impact was devastating. Dodi Fayed and driver Henri Paul were killed. Bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones suffered severe injuries but survived. Diana was found critically injured and was transported to a Paris hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. In the early hours of the morning, the news became official. Princess Diana was dead. The reaction was immediate and global. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Radio stations delivered breaking updates. Crowds gathered outside royal residences in Britain, while flowers began appearing in numbers never seen before. For millions of people, Diana was more than a member of the royal family. She was a humanitarian, a cultural icon, and a figure who seemed to connect with ordinary people in a way few public figures ever had. As shock turned into mourning, investigators began examining what had happened inside that Paris tunnel. French authorities would eventually conclude that the crash was a tragic traffic accident caused by a combination of excessive speed and driver impairment. But for many people, that explanation did not end the story. Questions about the pursuit by photographers, the emergency response, missing footage, and claims that surfaced after Diana's death would soon fuel years of debate. And to understand why so many people struggled to accept the official conclusion, we first need to understand who Diana was long before she became the world's most famous princess. Long before she became a global icon, Diana was simply Diana Frances Spencer, a young girl born into one of Britain's most prominent aristocratic families. She was born on July 1, 1961, at Park House, a residence located on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, England. Her family had long-standing ties to the British royal family, and from an early age Diana was surrounded by privilege, tradition, and public expectations. But behind the image of wealth and status, her childhood was far from perfect. When Diana was young, her parents' marriage broke down. The divorce that followed became a painful and highly emotional chapter in her life. After a custody dispute, Diana and her siblings remained with their father. Years later, biographers and close associates would describe how the separation deeply affected her and contributed to feelings of insecurity that followed her into adulthood. Despite these personal struggles, Diana developed a reputation for kindness and empathy. She was known for being caring, polite, and sensitive to the feelings of others. While she was not considered a standout academic student, teachers often praised her character and willingness to help those around her. During her school years, Diana enjoyed music, dance, swimming, and various extracurricular activities. She particularly loved ballet, although her height eventually made a professional career in dance unlikely. Unlike many people from elite backgrounds, she did not pursue a university education. Instead, she entered the workforce and sought a degree of independence. As a teenager and young adult living in London, Diana worked various jobs, including childcare and teaching assistant roles. Friends from that period often described her as warm, approachable, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone from an aristocratic family. At the time, there was little indication that she would one day become one of the most photographed women in history. Yet fate was quietly moving her toward a future that would change not only her life, but the future of the British monarchy itself. A chance connection to the royal family would soon place Diana in the orbit of the heir to the British throne, a relationship that would capture the attention of the entire world and create one of the most famous royal romances ever recorded. But what began as a seemingly perfect love story would eventually become something far more complicated. By the late 1970s, Diana Spencer was living a relatively ordinary life for a young woman from an aristocratic family. Meanwhile, Prince Charles, the heir to the British throne, was under increasing pressure to find a suitable wife. The two had crossed paths before through social circles connected to the royal family, but their relationship began to develop more seriously in 1980. At the time, Charles was still grieving the loss of his great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who had been killed in an IRA bombing the previous year. During several meetings, Diana's warmth and compassion reportedly left a strong impression on him. Their courtship moved quickly, although they spent relatively little time together in private. Public interest in the relationship grew rapidly. Diana's youth, charm, and aristocratic background seemed to fit the image many believed was expected of a future princess. Newspapers followed every development, turning the romance into a national obsession. In February 1981, Buckingham Palace announced the couple's engagement. The news sparked excitement across Britain and beyond. Diana, only 19 years old at the time, suddenly found herself at the center of worldwide attention. Reporters followed her daily movements, photographers documented her every appearance, and the public eagerly awaited the wedding. That wedding arrived on July 29, 1981. Held at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, the ceremony became one of the most watched events in television history. Hundreds of millions of viewers tuned in from around the world. Crowds packed the streets, waving flags and celebrating what many described as a modern fairy tale. For many people watching, it seemed like a storybook ending. A young woman had married a prince and entered the royal family. But beneath the celebrations, some warning signs already existed. Years later, both Charles and Diana would acknowledge that their relationship faced serious difficulties from an early stage. Publicly, they represented the future of the monarchy. Privately, however, the pressures of royal life, intense media scrutiny, and unresolved personal issues were beginning to create cracks beneath the surface. The world saw a perfect royal couple standing on palace balconies and appearing at public events. What it did not see was a marriage that would gradually become one of the most scrutinized and troubled relationships in modern history. And as Diana's popularity soared, tensions inside the royal household were quietly building toward a crisis that neither side could ignore. To the public, Prince Charles and Princess Diana appeared to be the ideal royal couple. They traveled the world, represented the monarchy at major events, and were photographed everywhere they went. But behind the carefully managed public image, their marriage was becoming increasingly strained. One of the central issues was Charles's long-standing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. Before meeting Diana, Charles and Camilla had shared a close bond that continued to influence his life. Over time, Diana became increasingly aware that the connection between them had not completely disappeared. Years later, both Charles and Diana would publicly acknowledge that their marriage had serious problems. What had looked like a fairy tale from the outside was becoming a deeply unhappy relationship for both individuals. As tensions grew, Diana found herself struggling with the pressures of royal life. She was constantly followed by photographers, judged by the media, and expected to maintain a flawless public image. In later interviews, she spoke openly about her emotional difficulties during this period, including her battle with bulimia nervosa and her feelings of isolation within the royal household. Yet while her personal life was becoming more difficult, her public popularity continued to rise. Diana had a natural ability to connect with people. Unlike many public figures of the era, she often interacted directly with ordinary citizens. She visited hospitals, schools, homeless shelters, and charities across Britain and around the world. One of her most significant humanitarian moments came in 1987 when she visited an AIDS ward and publicly shook hands with a patient without wearing gloves. At a time when misinformation and fear about HIV, AIDS were widespread, the gesture helped challenge misconceptions and drew international attention. The contrast was striking. As Diana became one of the most admired women in the world, her marriage was growing increasingly unstable. Public appearances could still project unity, but reports of separation, disagreements, and emotional distance became harder to ignore. By the late 1980s, the gap between appearance and reality had become enormous. The royal marriage that once symbolized hope and stability was now heading toward a very public breakdown, one that would soon unfold in front of millions of people and shake the British monarchy to its core. And as private struggles began spilling into public view, a series of revelations would transform a troubled marriage into an international scandal. By the early 1990s, the difficulties inside the marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana were no longer confined to palace walls. What had once been private tensions gradually became public knowledge, drawing intense media attention and creating one of the most closely watched royal controversies in modern history. In 1992, author Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story. The book revealed details about Diana's struggles, including her unhappiness within the marriage and the emotional challenges she had faced as a member of the royal family. Although Diana's direct involvement was not publicly confirmed at the time, it later became clear that she had cooperated with the project through intermediaries. The book shocked readers around the world. For years, many people had viewed Charles and Diana as the perfect royal couple. Now, a very different picture was emerging, one marked by loneliness, mistrust, and growing separation. Later that same year, British Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that Charles and Diana had formally separated. While they remained married, it was clear that the relationship had reached a breaking point. The situation escalated further in 1994 when Charles participated in a television documentary and admitted that he had been unfaithful during the marriage after it had, in his words, irretrievably broken down. The admission generated headlines worldwide and intensified public debate about the future of the royal family. Then came one of the most significant moments of Diana's life. In November 1995, Diana appeared in the BBC's Panorama interview with journalist Martin Bashir. During the broadcast, she discussed her struggles, her role within the monarchy, and the challenges of her marriage. The interview attracted an enormous audience and remains one of the most talked-about television appearances in royal history. The consequences were immediate. Public pressure increased, relations within the royal family deteriorated further, and the possibility of reconciliation disappeared. Less than a year later, on August 28, 1996, Charles and Diana officially divorced. Although the marriage was over, Diana's story was far from finished. For the first time in years, she was no longer bound by many of the expectations that had defined her royal life. She remained one of the most famous women in the world, but now she had the opportunity to shape her future on her own terms. What happened next would become the final chapter of her life, and it would unfold under the relentless gaze of the world's media. Following her divorce in 1996, Diana entered a new phase of life. No longer carrying the responsibilities of a senior royal role, she focused more heavily on humanitarian work, international advocacy, and raising her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. Despite stepping away from many royal duties, Diana remained one of the most recognized and photographed people in the world. Every public appearance attracted headlines, and media organizations competed fiercely for new photographs and stories about her life. In 1997, Diana's personal life once again became a subject of intense public interest when she began spending time with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian businessman Mohammed al-Fayed. Dodi was a film producer and a member of a wealthy and influential family. During the summer of 1997, the pair were photographed together on several occasions, including vacations aboard luxury yachts in the Mediterranean. Images of the couple quickly appeared on newspaper front pages around the world. As public attention increased, so did speculation. Some commentators viewed the relationship as a serious romance, while others questioned how long it might last. What is known is that Diana and Dodi spent a significant amount of time together during the final months of her life. However, many claims that later emerged, including rumors of an engagement or pregnancy, have never been supported by official investigations. Throughout that summer, photographers followed the couple almost constantly. The competition among paparazzi agencies was intense, and new photographs of Diana remained highly valuable. Friends and associates later described Diana as looking happier and more relaxed than she had been during some of the most difficult years of her marriage. At the same time, the extraordinary level of media attention surrounding her never truly disappeared. As August drew to a close, Diana and Dodi traveled to Paris. On August 30, 1997, they spent the evening at the Ritz Hotel, which was owned by Dodi's father. Outside, photographers gathered in large numbers, hoping to capture images of the couple. What began as an ordinary evening soon became a carefully planned effort to avoid the waiting cameras. Within hours, those decisions would place Diana, Dodi, and their companions on a route that would become one of the most scrutinized journeys in modern history. And before dawn arrived, the world would awaken to news that no one expected to hear. On the evening of August 30, 1997, Diana and Dodi Fayed arrived at the Ritz Hotel in Paris after spending part of the day together in the French capital. As had become routine throughout that summer, photographers were waiting outside, hoping to capture images of the world's most famous woman. The attention was relentless. Throughout the evening, crowds of photographers remained near the hotel entrances. According to later investigations, members of Dodi's security team developed a plan intended to help the couple leave without attracting the full attention of the waiting paparazzi. Shortly after midnight, a decoy vehicle left the front entrance of the hotel. Meanwhile, Diana and Dodi exited through a rear entrance and entered a black Mercedes-Benz S280. Behind the wheel was Henri Paul, the acting head of security at the Ritz. Bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones occupied the front passenger seat. At approximately 12:20 a.m., the vehicle departed. For a brief moment, the plan appeared successful. But several photographers soon noticed the Mercedes and began following it through the streets of Paris. Investigators later determined that the car accelerated as it traveled along the route toward Dodi's apartment. Just 3 minutes later, at approximately 12:23 a.m., the Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. What happened next lasted only seconds. The vehicle struck the right side of the tunnel, lost control, and then collided with a concrete pillar. The impact was catastrophic. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul suffered fatal injuries. Trevor Rees-Jones survived but was severely injured. Diana was still alive when emergency responders arrived. French emergency crews reached the scene and began treating her injuries immediately. Following French medical protocols, doctors focused on stabilizing her condition before transporting her to a hospital. Despite extensive efforts by medical personnel, Diana's injuries were ultimately too severe. In the early hours of August 31, doctors at Paris's Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital announced that Diana, Princess of Wales, had died. The news spread across the globe within minutes. Television broadcasts were interrupted. Newspapers rushed out special editions. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and other landmarks, leaving flowers, letters, and tributes. But as the world mourned, investigators began examining the circumstances of the crash. Almost immediately, questions emerged about the pursuit by photographers, the actions of the driver, and the events inside the tunnel. And those questions would soon evolve into one of the most debated and controversial investigations of the modern era. In the days following Diana's death, authorities in France launched a major investigation into the crash. Given Diana's global status and the extraordinary public interest surrounding the case, every detail was examined closely. Investigators began by analyzing the crash scene, reviewing witness statements, studying vehicle damage, and conducting forensic tests. One of the most significant findings involved the driver, Henri Paul. Toxicology reports concluded that his blood alcohol concentration was well above France's legal driving limit at the time. Investigators also found traces of prescription medication that could impair driving performance. According to the official findings, these factors likely affected his ability to operate the vehicle safely. The investigation also concluded that the Mercedes was traveling at a speed significantly above the tunnel's speed limit when it crashed. Technical examinations found no evidence of mechanical failure that would have caused the collision. In 1999, French authorities released their conclusions. Their report stated that the crash was caused primarily by Henri Paul's impaired driving and excessive speed, with the pursuit by paparazzi contributing to the dangerous circumstances. From the perspective of French investigators, the evidence supported the conclusion that Diana's death was the result of a tragic traffic accident rather than a planned attack. But for many people, the official explanation did not end the story. Several questions continued to attract attention. Critics pointed to the absence of direct footage of the crash itself. Others questioned the timeline of the emergency response and transport to the hospital. Some observers found it difficult to accept that one of the world's most famous women could die in what authorities described as a traffic collision. As public debate intensified, new claims began appearing in newspapers, television programs, and books. Speculation spread rapidly across the United Kingdom and beyond. It is important to distinguish between verified facts and allegations. The official investigations confirmed the circumstances of the crash, the driver's condition, and the vehicle's speed. However, many of the theories that emerged afterward were based on suspicion rather than evidence that investigators could verify. Despite the conclusions reached by French authorities, public pressure continued to grow. For some people, there were simply too many unanswered questions. And those questions would eventually lead to one of the largest and most expensive investigations ever conducted into the death of a public figure, an inquiry that would examine dozens of conspiracy claims and attempt to determine, once and for all, whether Princess Diana's death was an accident or something far more sinister. As the years passed, the official explanation for Diana's death faced continued scrutiny from members of the public, journalists, and conspiracy theorists. Among the most vocal critics was Mohammed al-Fayed, Dodi Fayed father. He publicly argued that the crash was not an accident and alleged that elements of the British establishment were involved. His claims attracted worldwide attention and helped fuel numerous theories that circulated for years. Some theories suggested that Diana and Dodi were planning to marry. Others claimed Diana was pregnant at the time of her death. More elaborate allegations accused the British Intelligence Service, MI6, or members of the royal family of orchestrating the crash. However, allegations are not the same as evidence. Because of the continuing controversy, Britain's Metropolitan Police launched a major investigation in 2004 known as Operation Paget. Led by former Metropolitan Police Commissioner Lord Stevens, the inquiry examined hundreds of witness statements, reviewed thousands of documents, and investigated more than 170 separate allegations connected to the case. The investigation lasted several years. When the final report was published in 2006, investigators concluded that there was no evidence supporting claims that Diana's death had been arranged by the royal family, MI6, or any government agency. The report also found no evidence that Diana was pregnant at the time of her death. A separate British inquest followed. After hearing testimony from hundreds of witnesses and reviewing extensive evidence, the jury reached its verdict in April 2008. The conclusion was that Diana and Dodi Fayed had been unlawfully killed due to the grossly negligent driving of Henri Paul and the actions of pursuing paparazzi. The jury did not find evidence of a conspiracy. Officially, the case was closed. Yet even today, not everyone accepts those findings. For some, the unanswered questions surrounding the crash continue to raise doubts. Others believe the extensive investigations examined the evidence thoroughly and reached the correct conclusion. What remains undeniable is the impact Diana had on millions of people around the world. Nearly 3 decades after her death, Diana is still remembered not only as a princess but as a humanitarian who challenged traditions, connected with ordinary people, and used her influence to draw attention to important causes. The mystery surrounding her final hours may never completely disappear from public discussion. But regardless of where people stand on the debates and theories, one fact remains unchanged: on August 31, 1997, the world lost one of its most influential and beloved public figures. And perhaps that is why the story of Princess Diana continues to fascinate people today, not because of what is known, but because of the questions that still linger in the shadows of history. What really happened inside that Paris tunnel? After decades of investigations, reports, and public debate, that question continues to keep one of history's most famous cases alive.